I never thought I'd be standing in my own driveway with a rolled-up survey map in one hand and my phone recording in the other. But here I was, facing off against Brenda Wilson, the infamous president of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. The May sun beat down on us as we squared off on what she claimed was community property, but what my deed clearly showed was mine. "Mr. Quincy Dawson, you need to move that boat immediately. It's in violation of our bylaws regarding street parking." Brenda's voice carried that special tone reserved for people who enjoyed wielding what little power they had over others. "This isn't street parking, Brenda. This is my driveway." I kept my voice level, despite the frustration building in my chest. "Our records indicate that the first 8 feet of all driveways in Oak Ridge Estates are HOA property for easement purposes," she replied, gesturing to the front of my driveway where my 22-foot fishing boat was parked. "The bylaws clearly state no boats, RVs, or trailers may be stored in visible areas." I'd moved into Oak Ridge Estates in Austin, Texas, just 6 months ago after accepting a position as an IT director at a local tech company. The neighborhood had seemed perfect, well-maintained homes, good schools, and a location just 15 minutes from downtown. The presence of an HOA hadn't bothered me initially. I'd assumed they handled reasonable things like making sure nobody painted their house neon green or let their lawn grow into a jungle. Boy, was I wrong. "I've read the bylaws, Brenda. They specify no street parking for recreational vehicles. This is my property, not the street, not HOA common space." I tried reasoning with her, but her pinched expression told me logic wasn't going to win this battle. "The board has discussed your situation, Mr. Dawson, and our decision is final. You have 48 hours to move the boat or face daily fines of $100. She handed me a pink violation notice and turned to leave, her sensible beige pumps clicking on the concrete. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table scrolling through the HOA documents I'd received when purchasing the house. There was nothing, absolutely nothing about the HOA owning any portion of residents' driveways. I pulled up my property deed and the original closing documents. According to everything I had, my property line began at the street curb and extended to the back fence. "This is ridiculous," I muttered, reaching for my phone. I called my neighbor, Thomas Miller, who'd lived in Oak Ridge for over 15 years. "Oh yeah, Brenda's been pulling that one for years," Thomas confirmed with a heavy sigh. "She started claiming that about 5 years ago when she became president. No one's ever actually challenged her on it, though. Most people just cave and move their stuff." "But it's not true, right? The HOA doesn't own our driveways." Thomas let out a dry laugh. "Not according to my deed. But fighting the HOA is like wrestling an alligator, exhausting and likely to end with you missing a limb." I thanked him and hung up, more determined than ever. I wasn't going to be bullied by Brenda Wilson and her power trip. I'd bought this house, this driveway, and I had the right to park my boat on my own property. The next morning, I called Cedar Hill Surveying, a local company with excellent reviews. I explained my situation to Hannah Jordan, the office manager. "We see HOA disputes all the time," Hannah assured me. "Our surveyor Mark can be out tomorrow morning to mark your property lines officially." "Perfect," I said, feeling a surge of relief. "The sooner the better." While waiting for the survey, I did some research on the Oak Ridge Estates HOA. The board consisted of 5 members. Brenda Wilson, president; Karen Mitchell, vice president; Robert Thompson, treasurer; Linda Garcia, secretary; and Michael Chen, member at large. According to the neighborhood newsletter I found online, Brenda had been president for the past 5 years, running unopposed each time. The newsletter also detailed multiple beautification initiatives and community standard enforcements that had been implemented during her reign. I also discovered that our HOA had one of the highest rates of violations and fines in the Austin area. That didn't seem like a coincidence. Mark from Cedar Hill Surveying arrived promptly at 9 a.m. the next day. He was a tall, weathered man with a no-nonsense attitude and equipment that looked more high-tech than I expected. "HOA problems, huh?" he asked as he set up his equipment. "How'd you guess?" I replied. "About 30% of our business these days," he said with a knowing smile. "People think buying a house means they own it, but HOAs have different ideas." Mark worked methodically, placing markers and taking measurements. I watched with growing anticipation, hoping the survey would confirm what I already believed to be true. After about 2 hours, Mark called me over with a satisfied nod. "Just as I suspected based on the records. Your property line begins right at the curb line here," he pointed to a small metal marker he'd placed, "and extends all the way back to this fence line." He handed me a preliminary drawing. "I'll have the official survey document prepared and certified by tomorrow afternoon." So the HOA definitely doesn't own any part of my driveway. I needed to hear him say it explicitly. "Not according to county records and the original subdivision plat," Mark confirmed. "Your driveway is entirely on your property, and you have exclusive rights to it, subject only to utility easements which don't affect your right to park there." I felt vindicated but knew the battle was just beginning. "How much will I owe you for the rush job?" "Standard survey is $650, but with the rush processing for the documentation, we're looking at $800 total." It wasn't cheap, but it would be worth every penny if it meant standing up to Brenda and the HOA. I wrote him a check, and he promised to email me the digital files as soon as they were ready, with the certified hard copies to follow. That evening, I received another visit from Brenda, this time accompanied by Karen Mitchell, the HOA vice president. Karen was a thin woman with highlighted blonde hair cut in the classic "I want to speak to your manager" style. She stood slightly behind Brenda, nodding in agreement to everything Brenda said. "Mr. Dawson, I see the boat is still in the driveway," Brenda began, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I wanted to remind you that your 48-hour notice period expires tomorrow, and fines will begin accruing." "Actually, Brenda, I've had my property surveyed today," I replied calmly. "The survey confirms that my entire driveway is on my property, not HOA property." Brenda's eyebrows shot up, but she quickly regained her composure. "Well, regardless of property lines, the bylaws still prohibit boats visible from the street. It's about maintaining neighborhood aesthetics." This was a new angle. "That's not what you said yesterday. You specifically stated that the HOA owned the first 8 feet of my driveway." "I think you misunderstood," Karen chimed in. "We were referring to the easement rights." "I understood perfectly," I countered. "And I've reviewed the bylaws thoroughly. They prohibit street parking of recreational vehicles and storage in front yards. My boat is on my driveway, which is neither the street nor my front yard." Brenda's lips formed a tight line. "The board interprets front yard to include driveways, Mr. Dawson." "That's a creative interpretation, but not one that's specified in the written bylaws," I replied. "I'll have the certified survey tomorrow, which will settle the property line issue once and for all." "We'll see about that," Brenda said ominously. "The board meeting is tomorrow night. I suggest you attend if you wish to plead your case before the fines begin." After they left, I called Thomas again. "They've changed their argument. Now they're saying driveways count as front yards under the bylaws." Thomas groaned. "Classic Brenda move. When one argument fails, try another. Are you going to the meeting tomorrow? Absolutely, I replied, with my survey in hand. The official survey arrived by email the next morning, with a promise that the physical copy would be delivered by courier that afternoon. I printed several copies, highlighted the relevant property lines, and prepared for the meeting. The HOA board meeting was held in the Oak Ridge Estates Community Center, a small building next to the neighborhood pool. I arrived 15 minutes early to find the room already half filled with residents. Clearly, I wasn't the only one with HOA issues. I took a seat near the front, survey documents in a folder on my lap. As I waited, more neighbors filed in, some nodding in my direction. Word had apparently gotten around about my dispute. At precisely 7 p.m., the board members entered and took their seats at the table facing the residents. Brenda called the meeting to order, running through standard agenda items before getting to violations and resident concerns. Several residents raised issues: a disputed fence color, a question about holiday decorations, a complaint about a neighbor's barking dog. The board handled each efficiently, which usually meant ruling in favor of whatever position Brenda took. Finally, Brenda looked directly at me. "Mr. Dawson, I believe you wanted to discuss your boat violation." I stood and approached the table, placing my survey documents in front of each board member. "Thank you for allowing me to speak. I had my property professionally surveyed yesterday after being told that the HOA owns the first 8 feet of my driveway, which is where my boat is parked. As you can see from these certified documents, my property line begins at the curb. The HOA does not own any portion of my driveway." The board members looked at the documents, with Robert Thompson, the treasurer, examining his copy particularly closely. "Furthermore," I continued, "I've reviewed the bylaws thoroughly, and they prohibit recreational vehicles from being parked on the street or stored in front yards. My boat is on my driveway, which according to standard definitions is not considered part of the front yard." Brenda cleared her throat. "Mr. Dawson, while your survey is interesting, the board has consistently interpreted front yard to include driveways for aesthetic purposes." "Where is that interpretation documented?" I asked, "because it's not in the bylaws I received." "It's in our board policy interpretations," Karen quickly interjected. "May I see that document?" I requested. The board members exchanged glances. Robert Thompson spoke up for the first time. "Actually, I don't recall us ever formally documenting that interpretation, Brenda. It's been our practice, but I don't believe we've ever amended the bylaws or created a written policy." Brenda shot Robert a look that could have melted steel. "Well, it's been our consistent enforcement position." "Selective enforcement doesn't create policy," I countered. "Unless this interpretation has been properly documented and distributed to all homeowners, you can't suddenly apply it to me." Michael Chen, who had been quiet until now, leaned forward. "He has a point, Brenda. We should review this." Brenda was clearly losing control of the situation. "Fine. The board will take this under advisement and issue a determination within 7 days. Until then, no fines will accrue." I nodded, gathering my documents. "Thank you. I look forward to your decision." As the meeting continued, I returned to my seat, noticing several neighbors giving me subtle thumbs-up signs. Apparently, standing up to Brenda was something of a novelty in Oak Ridge Estates. After the meeting, several residents approached me in the parking lot. "That was incredible," said an older woman who introduced herself as Patricia. "No one ever challenges Brenda like that. She's been running this neighborhood like her personal kingdom for years," added another resident named Jeff. "They tried to tell me I couldn't park my work truck in my driveway last year. I just started parking it in the garage, even though it barely fits." I was beginning to understand that my boat situation was just one symptom of a much larger problem in our HOA. The next morning, I was surprised to find Robert Thompson, the HOA treasurer, at my door. "Can we talk?" he asked, looking nervously over his shoulder. "Not here. Maybe at the coffee shop down the street." Intrigued, I agreed. 20 minutes later, we were sitting in a corner booth at Sunrise Coffee, away from any potential neighborhood eyes. "I've been on the board for 3 years," Robert began, stirring his coffee absently. "It wasn't always like this. Brenda's taken things too far, but most of us are afraid to challenge her." "Afraid of what?" I asked. Robert sighed. "She's vindictive. Board members who cross her suddenly find themselves facing violation notices for things that were never issues before. Last year, our previous secretary questioned her about some unusual expenditures, and within a week, she was being cited for her garden gnome collection that had been there for 10 years without issue." "That's abuse of power," I said, shocked at the pettiness. "It gets worse," Robert continued. "I've been reviewing our financial records more carefully lately. There are discrepancies, payments to vendors that don't seem to have actually performed work, consultation fees to companies I can't find any information on. Are you suggesting she's embezzling HOA funds?" I lowered my voice, though the cafe was nearly empty. Robert looked uncomfortable. "I don't have proof, just suspicions. But after seeing how you stood up to her last night, I thought maybe you could help. The annual HOA election is in 2 months. We need someone willing to run against her, someone who won't back down." I hadn't expected this conversation to take this turn. I just wanted to park my boat in peace. "I just moved in 6 months ago," I protested. "I don't know enough about the neighborhood or how the HOA should be run." "That might actually be an advantage," Robert countered. "You're not part of the old feuds and alliances, and you clearly know how to stand your ground and do your research." I promised to think about it, though I wasn't convinced. Running for HOA president seemed like volunteering for a headache I didn't need. When I returned home, there was a notice taped to my door. Not from the HOA, but from the city of Austin. Someone had reported my boat as being in violation of city ordinances. I was being ordered to move it within 72 hours or face municipal fines. I immediately called the number on the notice and reached a city code enforcement officer named Jason. "I received this notice about my boat," I explained, "but I've reviewed the city ordinances and I don't believe I'm in violation." "Let me check the report," Jason replied. After a few moments, he continued, "The complaint states your boat exceeds the height limitations for residential vehicle storage and blocks visibility for traffic." "That's simply not true," I said. "My boat is well within the height limitations and it's parked completely on my property, not blocking any sightlines." The report was filed by— Jason paused. "A Miss Brenda Wilson. She identified herself as the HOA president. Of course she did." "Would it be possible for someone to come out and verify whether there's actually a violation?" "I'm confident there isn't." Jason agreed to send someone the following day. After hanging up, I was fuming. Brenda had escalated from HOA threats to filing false complaints with the city. This was getting ridiculous. I decided to do some digging. If Robert's suspicions about financial irregularities were true, there might be records I could request as a homeowner. I spent the evening researching Texas HOA laws and homeowner rights. What I discovered was enlightening. Under Texas Property Code Section 209.005, homeowners had the right to inspect HOA records, including financial documents, meeting minutes, and more. I drafted a formal request for a wide range of documents from the past 5 years. The next day, the city inspector came by, took measurements and photos of my boat and its position, and confirmed what I already knew. "You're well within compliance," he said. "Your boat is under the height limit, properly parked on private property, and not creating any visibility issues. I'll update the record and close this complaint." "Can I get that in writing?" I asked. "Smart move," he nodded, typing on his tablet. "I'll email you the official determination right now." Later that afternoon, I hand-delivered my records request to Karen Mitchell's house, as she was the HOA secretary officially responsible for records. Her face fell when she read the extensive list of documents I was requesting. "This is quite comprehensive," she said, her voice tight. "It will take some time to gather all of this." "I understand," I replied pleasantly. "Under state law, you have 10 business days to make them available. I'm happy to review them at your convenience within that time frame." Karen's forced smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'll have to consult with Brenda about this. The law doesn't require Brenda's approval for a homeowner to access these records," I pointed out. "But feel free to consult with her. I'll expect to hear back from you soon about when I can review the documents." As I walked away, I could almost feel the daggers Karen was staring into my back. I was no longer just the guy with the boat problem. I was becoming a genuine threat to the HOA power structure. That evening, Thomas came by with a bottle of whiskey. "Thought you might need this," he said as I invited him in. "Word is spreading about your records request. You've stirred up the hornet's nest." We sat on my back patio, where I filled him in on my conversations with Robert and the city inspector. Thomas whistled low. "Brenda's never had someone fight back like this. Most people either give in or move away." "Has anyone ever looked into the HOA finances before?" I asked. "Not that I know of." "The annual budget gets presented at the meeting, but it's pretty vague: maintenance, landscaping, legal fees, that sort of thing. No one asks questions." "Well, someone should," I said, taking a sip of whiskey. "And it looks like that someone is me." Thomas raised his glass. "To the new guy who doesn't know when to quit." The next 7 days were surprisingly quiet. No visits from Brenda or other board members, no new notices. I almost began to think they were backing down. Then I received an email from Karen. "In response to your records request, the documents will be available for review this Saturday at 10 a.m. at the community center. Please note that, in accordance with HOA policy, there will be a $250 administrative fee for document retrieval and supervision." I nearly spat out my coffee. A $250 fee? That seemed designed to discourage homeowners from exercising their legal rights. Another quick search of Texas property law confirmed my suspicion. While HOAs could charge reasonable copying fees, they couldn't impose excessive administrative charges that functioned as barriers to access. I replied to Karen's email, copying the entire board. "Thank you for arranging access to the records. However, I must point out that under Texas Property Code Section 209.005, the HOA may only charge reasonable costs for reproduction of records, not administrative fees for retrieval or supervision. I'll be happy to pay for any copies I request, but not the $250 fee, which appears to violate state law." Within an hour, I received a terse response from Brenda. "The fee has been waived this time. The records will be available as scheduled." Saturday arrived, and I went to the community center armed with a notebook, my phone for taking photos of documents, and a thorough understanding of what I was looking for. Karen was there, along with Michael Chen, who apparently had been assigned to supervise my review. "We've pulled everything you requested," Michael said, gesturing to several boxes of documents. "You have 2 hours. The law doesn't specify a time limit," I pointed out. Michael looked uncomfortable. That's just what Brenda told us to say. I'll take as long as I need, I replied firmly. I suggest you get comfortable. For the next 4 hours, I methodically went through financial statements, invoices, meeting minutes, and vendor contracts. Karen left after the first hour, clearly bored, but Michael stayed, occasionally answering my questions about specific documents. What I found was disturbing. Over the past 3 years, there had been multiple payments to a company called BW Consulting for neighborhood improvement consulting, totaling nearly $30,000. There were also several large payments to Sunshine Landscaping for work that, as far as I could tell from driving around the neighborhood, had never been performed. Most telling were the board meeting minutes. Public versions that had been distributed to homeowners differed significantly from the official signed versions in the records. Discussions about fee increases, special assessments, and policy changes had been omitted from the public versions. Michael, what's BW Consulting? I asked casually, watching his reaction. He shifted uncomfortably. I'm not sure. Brenda handles most of the vendor relationships. And did you approve these payments in board meetings? Michael looked at the invoices I was pointing to. I don't specifically recall these, but we approve a lot of expenses. Without knowing what they're for, I pressed. Michael didn't answer, but his expression told me everything I needed to know. By the time I finished, I had filled my notebook with notes and taken dozens of photos of suspicious documents. Michael looked relieved when I finally said I was done. Find what you were looking for, he asked, trying to sound casual. I found plenty, I replied. Thanks for your help. That night, I organized my findings and did some additional research. A quick search revealed that there was no registered business in Texas named BW Consulting. However, there was a BW Properties LLC registered to one Brenda Wilson with the same address as her home. Sunshine Landscaping was similarly suspicious. Their listed address was a P.O. box, and they had no website or social media presence unusual for a legitimate landscaping company in 2025. I called Robert Thompson and arranged to meet him the next day. When I showed him what I'd found, his face paled. This is worse than I thought, he admitted. I suspected some financial impropriety, but this looks systematic. BW Consulting is Brenda, I confirmed. And I'd bet money that Sunshine Landscaping either doesn't exist or is connected to her or someone she knows. What are you going to do? Robert asked. First, I'm going to formally request a determination on my boat situation since they never got back to me. Then I think it's time to call a lawyer and possibly the police. Robert nodded. I'll back you up. This has gone on too long. Monday morning, I sent an email to the entire board. It has been 10 days since the board meeting where you said you would take my boat situation under advisement and issue a determination within 7 days. Please provide your determination immediately. Additionally, I have concerns about financial irregularities I discovered during my records review, which I am prepared to discuss at the next board meeting. The response was swift. Brenda called me less than an hour later. Mr. Dawson, her voice was honey-sweet, a complete change from her previous tone. I apologize for the delay in getting back to you about your boat. The board has reviewed the situation and agrees that since your survey confirms the boat is on your property, and given the ambiguity in our bylaws regarding driveways, no violation exists. You're free to keep your boat where it is. Thank you, I said, surprised by the complete turnaround. And what about the financial concerns I mentioned? There was a pause. I'm not sure what you're referring to specifically, but I assure you all HOA expenditures are legitimate and approved by the board. If you have questions, we can address them at the next meeting." "I look forward to that," I replied, "particularly discussing the payments to BW Consulting and Sunshine Landscaping." The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, Brenda spoke, her voice now ice cold. "I don't appreciate what you're implying, Mr. Dawson. Be very careful about making accusations you can't support." "I have documentation," I said simply. "See you at the next meeting." After hanging up, I called a lawyer who specialized in HOA law. After explaining the situation and emailing her copies of the most damning documents, she agreed to take my case. "This goes beyond HOA overreach," said Olivia Martinez, my attorney. "What you've described could constitute fraud and embezzlement. We should take this to the district attorney." 2 days later, I met with an investigator from the Travis County District Attorney's Office, bringing all my evidence. The investigator, Detective Paul Harrison, listened carefully and examined the documents. "We take HOA fraud seriously," he assured me. "These organizations control millions of dollars with little oversight. I'll open an investigation right away." Word spread quickly through the neighborhood that something big was happening. Brenda must have sensed the walls closing in because she called an emergency board meeting for the following evening. I arrived at the community center to find it packed with residents. The tension in the room was palpable. Brenda looked composed but strained as she called the meeting to order. "We've called this emergency meeting to address some concerns that have been raised about HOA management," she began. "Before we open the floor for discussion, I want to announce that after 5 years of service, I've decided to resign as president, effective immediately." A collective gasp went through the room. No one had expected this. "Furthermore," she continued, her voice tight, "I will be withdrawing from the upcoming election. I believe fresh leadership will benefit our community moving forward." Karen looked shocked while Robert and Michael exchanged glances. Linda Garcia, who had been mostly silent in previous meetings, looked down at her hands. After Brenda's bombshell announcement, the meeting descended into chaos. Residents demanded explanations about the financial issues, with several people mentioning they'd been contacted by Detective Harrison. Karen tried to maintain order but was clearly overwhelmed. Robert finally stood up. "I think we need to be transparent here. There have been financial irregularities discovered in our HOA records, which are currently under investigation. As treasurer, I take partial responsibility for not providing better oversight. I suggest we suspend all non-essential HOA activities and expenditures until a full audit can be completed." The motion passed unanimously, with even Karen reluctantly raising her hand in agreement. As the meeting wound down, several residents approached me. "We heard you were the one who uncovered all this," said Patricia. "Thank you for having the courage to stand up." "Someone had to do it," I replied. "I just wanted to park my boat in my driveway. I never expected to uncover fraud." "Will you run for the board now?" asked another neighbor. "We need someone like you." I hadn't considered it seriously until that moment. Maybe I will. Over the next few weeks, the investigation accelerated. Detective Harrison obtained warrants for Brenda's financial records and those of her LLC. The evidence was damning. BW Consulting had received over $45,000 from the HOA over 5 years for services never rendered. Sunshine Landscaping turned out to be owned by Karen's husband, with payments of over $60,000 for minimal or non-existent work. The district attorney filed charges against both Brenda and Karen for theft, fraud, and misappropriation of funds. The news made local headlines. HOA officials charged with embezzling homeowner funds. With the annual HOA election approaching, the remaining board members scrambled to restore order. Robert stepped up as interim president, and a special committee was formed to revise the bylaws and establish better financial controls. Thomas came by one evening with a six-pack of beer. "So, the neighborhood hero," he said with a grin. "From boat dispute to bringing down the corrupt HOA empire." "Not bad for the new guy," I laughed. "I still can't believe it spiraled like this, all because Brenda couldn't stand seeing a boat in a driveway." "Are you going to run for the board?" Thomas asked. "Half the neighborhood is hoping you will." I took a sip of beer, considering it. "I think I might. Someone needs to help rebuild this HOA the right way. Transparent, reasonable, focused on actually improving the neighborhood instead of harassing homeowners." "You've got my vote," Thomas said, raising his bottle in a toast. 2 months after my initial confrontation with Brenda over my boat, I found myself elected to the Oak Ridge Estates HOA board, along with Robert and 3 other neighbors who wanted change. Our first official act was to hire an independent auditor to review all financial records and implement new transparency measures. The criminal cases against Brenda and Karen were proceeding through the court system. Both had pleaded not guilty initially, but facing overwhelming evidence, Brenda eventually accepted a plea deal that included restitution of all misappropriated funds, probation, and community service. Karen's case was still pending. As for me, my boat remained proudly parked in my driveway, a symbol of one homeowner's stand against HOA overreach that had unexpectedly exposed a much bigger problem. The new HOA bylaws, which we were in the process of drafting with homeowner input, would specifically clarify that driveways were not considered front yards for the purpose of parking restrictions. One sunny Saturday, about 6 months after the whole saga began, I was washing my boat in the driveway when Detective Harrison stopped by. "Thought you'd want to know," he said. "Karen Mitchell took a plea deal this morning. Between her and Brenda Wilson, your HOA will be getting back about $105,000 in restitution." "That's great news," I replied, genuinely pleased. "Any idea what we should do with it?" "That's up to you and your new board," he said with a smile. "But maybe start with something everyone can enjoy." People remember the tangible things. That evening, at an informal board meeting at my house, we discussed the restitution funds. "I think Detective Harrison had a good point," I said. "Let's do something visible that benefits everyone." After much discussion, we decided to use the funds to upgrade the aging playground equipment at our community park and install solar lighting along the neighborhood walking paths, improvements that had been promised for years, but never delivered. The following weekend, we held a community meeting to announce the plans. The turnout was the largest anyone could remember, with nearly every household represented. 6 months ago, I stood in this room fighting for the right to park my boat in my own driveway, I told the assembled neighbors. Today, we're announcing major improvements to our community spaces that will benefit everyone. The difference is night and day, and it shows what can happen when an HOA works for its residents instead of against them. The applause was heartfelt. As I looked around at the faces of my neighbors, many of whom I now knew by name, I felt a sense of community that hadn't existed before. After the meeting, as people mingled over coffee and cookies, Patricia approached me with a smile. "You know, Quincy, when you moved in, Brenda told everyone you were going to be trouble," she said with a chuckle. "I guess she was right, just not in the way she meant." "Sometimes trouble is exactly what's needed," I replied with a laugh. A few weeks later, on a perfect spring day, I was installing new cabinet hardware in my kitchen when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a young couple standing there looking nervous. "Hi, I'm Jason and this is my wife Emma. We're moving in across the street next week," the man said. The real estate agent mentioned there had been some issues with the HOA, but that things were better now. "We were wondering if you could tell us what to expect," I smiled, wiping my hands on a towel. "Why don't you come in? I've got quite a story to tell you." I led them to my living room, where through the front window my boat sat in the driveway, gleaming in the sunlight, a constant reminder that sometimes standing your ground and showing up with the facts is exactly what's needed. It all started when Brenda Wilson from the HOA claimed they owned my driveway, I began, watching their interested expressions. So I showed them the property line survey. The playground renovation was completed by early fall, and we held a neighborhood picnic to celebrate its opening. Children played on the new equipment while parents chatted and shared food. The atmosphere was relaxed and friendly, a far cry from the tension that had pervaded community gatherings in the past. As board president, a role I'd been elected to after serving 3 months as a regular member, I found myself constantly approached by neighbors who wanted to share ideas or simply express appreciation for the changes we'd made. "I've lived here 15 years, one older gentleman told me, "and this is the first time I've actually enjoyed an HOA event. Usually, I just tried to avoid Brenda and her clipboard of violations. The new HOA had a different approach entirely. We focused on building community rather than policing it. Violation notices were now rare and reserved for serious issues that affected health, safety, or property values. Most concerns were handled through friendly conversations rather than threatening letters. We'd also implemented a complete overhaul of the financial systems. All expenses were now posted online for homeowners to review. Board meeting minutes were published in full, and we'd established a finance committee of homeowners with accounting backgrounds to provide additional oversight. 1 year after my initial confrontation with Brenda, I stood in my driveway looking at my boat, the unwitting catalyst for so much change. I'd been so close to giving in that day, to simply moving the boat to storage to avoid the hassle. How different things would have been if I had. Thomas wandered over from next door, a Saturday tradition we'd developed. "Hard to believe it's been a year," he said, handing me a beer. "Sometimes I still can't believe how it all played out," I admitted, "from property line disputes to criminal charges." "Absolute power corrupts absolutely," Thomas mused. Brenda had been unchallenged for so long she thought she was untouchable. We were interrupted by the arrival of Robert, now our HOA treasurer and my right-hand man in reforming the organization. "Just dropped off the last of the restitution checks at the bank," he reported happily. "The full amount has now been recovered." "Perfect timing," I replied. "Just in time for Phase 2 of our improvements." Phase 2 included adding a small covered pavilion to the community park and upgrading the landscaping throughout the common areas, work that would be done by a legitimate landscaping company selected through a transparent bidding process. "Any word on what happened to Brenda?" Thomas asked. Robert nodded. "My cousin lives in Meadow Creek Estates on the other side of town. Apparently, she moved there last month, already complaining about their HOA not being strict enough." We all laughed at the irony. "Some people never learn," I said, "but at least she's someone else's problem now." As the sun set over Oak Ridge Estates that evening, I reflected on how a simple property dispute had led to such profound changes in our community. The lesson was clear. Knowing your rights and standing up for them matters, not just for yourself but potentially for everyone around you. My boat still sits in my driveway to this day, a symbol of standing your ground when you know you're right. And every time I see it, I'm reminded that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply show up with the facts and refuse to back down. The HOA still exists in Oak Ridge Estates, but now it serves the community instead of ruling it. And that has made all the difference.